So, Uncle Andy's Fireside Chat, the usual part of my presentation, changes what we've made. In 16, we no longer drop continue workspaces, except for typing paren continue. If you want the old behaviour, you have to call 2704 ibeam. We all thought this was a really good idea, and I thought it was a brilliant idea until I forgot that all of our QAs rely on when there's a problem dropping a continue. So I had a certain amount of work to do to put 2704 back into the QA systems. So continues are no longer dropped by default unless you explicitly ask it to, but they can be re-enabled. Continues are no longer automatically loaded when you start Dyalog APL version 16. It's just another workspace. If you want to load continue.dws, then type paren load space continue. There is no way of re-enabling this feature. And I won't say it's an over my dead body re-enablement, but I believe that Mr. Kronberg has strong views on this as well. We think this is a better idea. The vast majority of people find that the automatic loading of continues causes trouble. Right, quick show of hands, who agrees with Morton and me? From where I'm standing, and I've got dodgy eyesight, that's a majority. 16.0, we've added the ability of system commands to take parameters, and so far only paren save and paren sinl do this. Jay mentioned this, I think on Monday, wasn't it? That you got this ludicrous situation where if you saved a workspace, changed its wuss ID, and tried to save it again, you got the message, this wuss is Andy's wuss. So what? Now, if it can be saved as that file, it will be. No questions asked. So if you type paren save my extremely large Excel spreadsheet that I spent 6 months writing and hit enter, you've just overwritten that Excel spreadsheet. No questions asked, no checking. If it can be overwritten, it will be. The only thing that can stop it is file permissions, or possibly directory permissions. Paren si and paren sinl have two parameters. Minus tid says, show me the SI stack for a particular thread only. And paren sin shows n lines only of the output of paren si. So in this case, I've got 5 functions on the stack, and if I type paren si2, it shows me the top 2 lines of the output, or the first 2 lines of the output. And if I do -2, I get the last 2 lines of output. And if I do -2, I get an error. We think this is useful in cases where you've got a huge number of items on the stack, because I believe the output of a paren si is not interruptible, or at least I can distinctly recall about 20 years ago waiting 45 minutes for a paren si output to finish, as some gentleman had written some code that looked like BASIC, and he had a quad stop in it each time. So that went into version 16. A feature, a bug fix, an enhancement that we put in, I think, about a couple of weeks after we released 16, is that, autocomplete no longer ignores invalid input. So if you type quad A, it's just the drop down, this is on Windows, you see all the system functions beginning with A. And in version 15, if you then type the character, if you type 1, it showed you the same list. Well, quad A1 is an invalid list of items, so now in 16 it's empty. Quad NGET now generates a file access error when given a directory to read on all platforms. I think AIX particularly, if you type quad NGET dot, you've got a translation error. And that is because on Unix, everything is a file. And AIX says, you open a directory, you want to read a directory, you can do so. So we've standardized on this error message. We've made a few changes, bug fixes mainly, that we have put into the 17.0 at the moment, which we're likely to backport to 16 in due course when we're happy with them. I think this is possibly the most important one, is that quad fix and the editor will support the use of del to indicate a recursive nature of a defun within scripted objects. At the moment, if you try to do that, you end up with a error of some sort. The tracer and editor with these fixes in will remember if the stop bits have been set and unset. That didn't work in all cases. And if you use dock tracer windows, if you keep on clicking on the continue key, the window gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So you only have a finite amount of time you can actually run before your function can't be run anymore. It's disappeared. We've improved some syntax colouring, and one of the perennial problems we have with the editor and tracer is that you end up in situations where you hover over a name, you hit enter, expecting to edit the name in question, and what it actually does in a scripted object is to create another instance of that name. And we've eliminated a few more of those. If you find situations where in the tracer you hit enter on something and it creates a new instance of that name, please let us know. And we've also done some work on reducing the amount of movement when you flip between the editor and tracer and the text moves around. We have some extraordinarily late changes, which is actually what I mean by it is version 17. We have been saying that we are deprecating support for, sorry Richard, small span component files, not 32-bit component files. In version 16 they are read-only. In version 17, not only are they read-only, but you must alter your code to include the read-only variant. Okay? Otherwise you just get this error message, which is this file must be converted to large span file. So, we would hope there aren't too many there aren't too many small span files out there in the world, but it might not be a bad idea to have a look and see if you've got any. If you do paren copy of a file, it preserves all of the internal metadata of the file, so it would preserve the access matrices and I believe the timestamps associated with the rights to the original file. So one brute force approach is to find all of the small span files on your system, and simply quad F copy the lot of them. This is a very vague slide. We in 16 tightened up on the language associated with control structures. Rules now such are if a control structure is not meant to have anything after it, it cannot have anything after it. And I think over time you'll see some more of this just tightening up of the language. Nothing major is going to happen, but just as you're looking at code, it might be worth keeping an eye on things and just thinking, I wonder if I'm getting away with a syntax or a structure that's not valid. Two reasons. First of all, we might tighten it up, in which case your code might stop working. And secondly, if you start using the compiler, 400 IBeam that, Jay, isn't it? Yeah, 400 IBeam. The compiler is more strict, and again, you may have to change your code to take advantage of the compiler. There are, of course, questions like, what do we do with this? Quad F untie -1 has been a no-op in Dyalog APL since heaven knows when. We could argue, strictly speaking, that is a domain error. But this sort of error, we would say, we're more inclined to leave it because it would cause more grief to our users as a whole by having to change their code if it's in there, rather than us making the change. Another favourite of my presentations is the editor. This is a very short one this year. You may have noticed in version 16, the search and find options under Windows no longer use a Windows regular expression match, regular expression engine. It now uses exactly the same engine that we use for Quad R and Quad S. And we've also put in a few more buttons. We've got match whole word, enabling toggle the regex expert searches, and clear the search string as well. We changed, one of the biggest problems we've had over the years, one of the biggest problems I've had over the years, is working out where things like the Conga libraries and shared libraries and DLLs end up. In this discussion, if I use the word shared library, I apologize to the Windows users, and if I use the expression DLL, I apologize to the rest of the universe. They are, as far as I'm concerned at the moment, the same thing. What we've done is we've stripped out the complexity of what the interpreter tries to do and guessing at where the libraries might be. So our approach is there are certain places where you can put a shared library or DLL and we will find it. And if it's a non-standard place, you must tell the interpreter where to look. And by you, I include, for example, the Conga stuff, which is, we'll see that in a minute. So on Windows, we very simply call the system function load library. What that generally means is put your DLL either in the same directory as your executable or on your system path. That is a somewhat brief précis of the online documentation for load library. On non-Windows, we very explicitly look for, if you only give a relative name for a library to load in Quad NA, we look in $dialog/lib, and if we can't find it there, we just call the system function dlopen. And that probably means that on a lot of, on Linux and Mac OS, we look in LD library path, and on AX, we look in lib path. Here's a gotcha that had caught me out so many times. If, for example, with Conga calls the Conga shared library, the Conga SSL library. If the SSL shared library is not present, then the error message you get tells you that the Conga shared library can't be found. That's not us making your life difficult. That is the case on all operating systems, in that the error message you get back from a load library or dlopen only ever names the library you're explicitly calling and not one of its dependencies. So if you see a message that says, can't find this library, resist the temptation to throw your laptop out the window, scream at the machine, and then go and find out what the dependencies are. So, with Conga, the default path for a version 2 Conga, using version 2 style Conga code with the DRC namespace, you basically just say call drc.init, quote, quote. If you're using the new Conga syntax or functions, then it's conga.init, quote, quote. If you want to put your libraries somewhere else, then simply call drc.init with the path to the Conga library, or path to the Conga library, conga.init, quote, quote. Finally, Appleman. This is a request. Appleman is a tool that's been put into Dyalog APL, has been there for a while, which tracks the calls you make, the code makes to primitives and system functions and such like, and includes details of the type of the arguments and some idea of the length of the arguments, or the structure of the arguments. We have got some incredibly intelligent people in Dyalog, Roger, Marshall, Jay in particular, who are concentrating on performance. 96 primitives, however many other system functions and so on and so forth. They can't do them all at once. What order do you do them in? Well, in isolation, we kind of have to make guesses at what's best. If our customers could run Appleman from time to time and send us the output, and the output of an Appleman session you can look at to make sure there's nothing in there that's contains sensitive information. First of all, it helps us to work out which order to tackle performance issues with. And secondly, Marshall says that with his new PQA tests, his performance QAs, he can make use of Appleman output from our customers to make sure that the tests more accurately reflect typical usage of Dyalog APL. So, if one of our customers sends us the output of their PQA tests, they're going to get a nice, effectively they will have some more influence on our performance work than perhaps you might expect. So please, Appleman is something we'd ask you to run. And to use it, you load your workspace, you quad enqueue the Appleman event with the name of the output file you want. Then you run your application, and at the end you type, you call the Appleman event with an empty argument. If you don't do that, as Andy found out last week, you don't get any output. At which point you make an idiot of yourself by asking Jay, why doesn't Appleman work? That, Andy, is because you got it wrong. And here, open. This is the output of a very important piece of work that I was running to get some Appleman output. I even succeeded in getting out of that particular game of Arachnid, which was wonderful. And as you see, all it does is it just lists the type, the primitive effectively, what the arguments were, and some information about the length of the arguments. Let's say here you can see that we've got some simple indexing. We're using 4-byte integers, 1-byte integers, and then we've got some fairly small arrays as we've got dimensions of less than 1 in the thing. We've got Booleans, indexed assignment. The other thing it's quite useful for, in Arachnid, I ran it, looked at this output and thought, what on earth did I put a call to quad TS in Arachnid for when I wrote it back in 1992? That apparently is my random seed generator in there. Arachnid still has its uses, even if it does waste everyone's time. Okay, and that's it, sir. Thank you very much for listening to me once more time.